Fraser Brown and Sarah Orchard again. Now for the next half hour on 5 Live. It's 5 Live Formula One. We're just 2 days away from the first race of the new season, and there for us is Rosanna Tennant.
Thank you very much, Sonia. Yes, it is a beautiful morning here in Melbourne. Blue skies, a little bit of cloud, but we're already at 20 degrees and it's 8:30 here in Australia. We're expecting it to get up into the mid-30s. It's going to be a hot day as we set the grid for the Australian Grand Prix, the season opener for 2025. And let me tell you, the excitement is really building here in Melbourne. There are so many storylines to keep an eye on. Of course, we've got Sir Lewis Hamilton, the 7-time world champion, moving from Mercedes to Ferrari. He's already been out on track yesterday because we had 2 practice sessions, but today it is all about qualifying. I can tell you, Formula One is well and truly back.
Max Verstappen has rolled the dice and scored a hard 4 times a champion in Formula One. McLaren are the 2024 F1 Constructors Champions.
Wow, we're talking Formula One.
Wins for Ferrari.
Every time you get into a Ferrari, there's such a special feeling. Even just working with the team, it's really unique.
Charles Leclerc wins the Monaco Grand Prix, the first Monegasque driver to win around the streets of the Principality since Louis Chiron in 1931.
My only dream that remains to be ticked is to be a world champion.
George Russell wins the Las Vegas Grand Prix.
You got to believe. I'll go to Melbourne believing we can win.
Lando Norris wins the Miami Grand Prix.
I think of how to achieve it. I don't even think of what happens when it happens.
Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc, George Russell, Oscar Piastri, Lando Norris, a champion in Formula One.
Welcome to the Albert Park circuit here in Melbourne. I'm Rosanna Tennant, and alongside me here at the track is the BBC's F1 correspondent Andrew Benson, our lead commentator Harry Benjamin, and the former McLaren mechanic Mark Priestley. It's a very good morning to you all, gentlemen, because we're getting ready here for qualifying later today. There is such a buzz in the city. There's such a buzz here at the paddock. The fans have been coming in their thousands, ready to see what this season has in store for us all. Harry, it's been so great, hasn't it, to finally get things going, because we've talked so much about what this season might entail. Did we get a little bit of a feel of what to expect yesterday in the practice sessions?
A little bit, I think, but we've still got more questions to be answered, really. It was proper sort of first day back at school vibes on the Friday, wasn't it, for practice day? But it was our first chance to see these cars kind of finally turn in anger. Of course, we had pre-season testing, but nobody really knows the pecking order when it comes to that. But the sun was out, and it's looking like, well, Ferrari might have some pace there. McLaren haven't quite shown their full hand, but they are expected to be coming out of the blocks quick. But it was those Ferraris, of Charles Leclerc in particular, looking quite quick. Hamilton a little bit off when it came to the short-run pace, but in the long-run pace, much closer as well. So I think it's going to be tight. We've still got some more questions to go into practice 3 and then, of course, qualifying.
Just to remind everyone, it was Lando Norris in the McLaren who set the fastest time in FP1, the first practice session of the day, and then it was Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari fastest in FP2. I think, Andrew, it was fair to say coming into this weekend, McLaren were billed as the favourites. People at least are saying that. Is that mind games? Other teams trying to heap the pressure on the reigning Constructors' world champions?
Well, I think there's maybe a bit of mind games involved, but it's more a reflection of what happened in pre-season testing when Lando Norris did one particular long run, which was extremely impressive and much faster than anybody else could manage at the same time. They've come here, McLaren, and they're still really quick, but yesterday in practice it looked really close when you dug down into the numbers between McLaren and Ferrari. Ferrari probably just edged it yesterday, but it was really hard to interpret because on Leclerc's long run, which is where people take most of their understanding from, he turned his engine up a bit at the end of it, so gave himself a bit more power. But McLaren and Ferrari are really, really close together. Then it looks like Mercedes not far behind, and Red Bull probably 4th quickest of the top 4 teams. Max Verstappen definitely struggling. The team and his new teammate, goodness me, he was really off the pace yesterday.
That's Liam Lawson.
Liam Lawson, yeah, replacing Sergio Perez about a second off, both on short and long runs. But as Harry says, that's only practice. Hamilton was saying he's still learning the car. But I think at the moment it looks like, for pole at least, a fight between Norris and Leclerc and Oscar Piastri, the other McLaren driver.
From what I'm hearing from you both already, Harry and Andrew, it's feeling like there are so many possibilities when it comes to people on the podium this year, race winners. Mark, you worked at McLaren back in the day when Lewis Hamilton was there in his first stint in Formula One. They are the defending champions when it comes to the Constructors' Championship. But they want the drivers too. Have you been and had a chat with them all? How are they feeling? How realistic an opportunity is it to take both this year?
It is a big opportunity for them. And, you know, they went through last year where really they did an incredible job because they won the Constructors' Championship, but they only really got going sort of halfway through the season. They started very slow. They had a car that was difficult to get the best out of it. Red Bull dominated the early part of the season. So actually what McLaren did was a dramatic turnaround. At least that's what it looked like. But in reality, in the background, they were actually working for many years, rebuilding the organisation, putting the right people in place, processes, structures, and just gradually getting closer and closer to be able to deliver something spectacular, which is what they did. So all that stuff in the background, the infrastructure is all there and should give them the opportunity this time around to start the season strong. So everybody at McLaren is actually very, very hopeful this could be the big opportunity.
Of course, perhaps we focus a little more on the British drivers, so the Lando Norris potential. But of course, here in Australia, it's all about the home hero, Oscar Piastri, in Papaya Orange. Zach Brown, their CEO, and Andrea Stella, the McLaren team principal, they've both got a little bit of a problem on their hands. OK, great to have two drivers who could go for a driver's title, but how are they going to manage it? Because we saw some interesting calls from the McLaren pit wall in 2024, Andrew, didn't we?
Yes, I think 24 was kind of like a learning season for McLaren. They'd been off the top of the charts in Formula 1 for so long. I mean, it was 1998 that they last won a championship before last year. So they were kind of learning on the job, last year, and made a couple of missteps along the way. Although they were not so bad. I mean, I think people would immediately think of Hungary, where they ended up with Piastri had kind of dominated the race with Norris just behind him. They ended up with the cars inverted after the final pit stops, and then they had to ask Norris to give the lead back because that was what they considered to be fair. But I think overall there's quite a good team harmony at McLaren, and they understand the two drivers, that they're working for the team. How long that lasts, if it's a championship fight, is an interesting question. But what I would say just overall about McLaren, basically until now, Norris has had a definitive edge on pace. And unless Piastri can step it up a little bit, Norris will be the guy who's ahead more often than not. And they will get to a point later in the season where they'll have to choose between one driver or the other if that's the case.
See, I want beef. I want drama. I want fireworks. I want ignoring of team orders. I want there to be absolute chaos on track, fighting for the title. I do see your point, and I do agree with you. I think there is relative harmony. They particularly look back at the Qatar sprints from last year, where Norris pulled out of the way right at the very end as they were crossing the line to let Oscar Piastri through. It was kind of paying him back for his assistance at the Sao Paulo Grand Prix and helping Norris win, and as a result gave Piastri the sprint, which, you know, you don't see that very often in Formula One at all, of a teammate, whether it's a sprint or a Grand Prix, gifting your teammate a win. But I do think it's not going to be a smooth ride. Oscar Piastri comes into this weekend. He's riding high off being on home soil. He's also just freshly signed a multi-year contract extension with the team. So he is there to stay. The team are confident in him, but he lacks that experience still compared to Lando Norris. I think we are expecting quite a lot from Piastri because of his pedigree coming in. Formula 3 champion, Formula 2 champion, then boom, into Formula 1 and the whole furore around his departure from Alpine as a reserve and McLaren taking him. So there is a lot of expectation there, and I think he feels that. But his personality and the way he conducts himself, he doesn't want to be a number 2 driver, and he's not going to allow that to happen.
No, he won't. And what I would say is there's always harmony at this point of a season, isn't there? They always come in. If you think back to the sort of Lewis Hamilton, Nico Rosberg, I'm always reminded of that race in Bahrain. Do you remember the duel in the desert where They fought each other all the way through? They got out, they're hugging, they're laughing and joking about it. Fast forward 6 months, they hated each other.
So, fast forward a couple of months, Barcelona.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I suspect as soon as the championship is a very real possibility, and if it turns out that it's those two drivers fighting for it, your teammate suddenly becomes your worst enemy.
Well, as we were saying, it was McLaren who came into the season perhaps with the target on their back, having taken the Constructors' title last year. But Andrew, as you've said, from looking at the data yesterday, FP1 and FP2, it's super close between them and Ferrari. And let me tell you, the spotlight has been on Ferrari. Well, really, since the beginning of last year when Lewis Hamilton dropped the bombshell that he would be leaving Mercedes and joining the Scuderia in 2025. Finally, we're here in 2025, but we've been speaking about that story for so long. Has he made the right decision at the right time, Andrew, again?
Looks like it. I mean, Ferrari, as we've said, Ferrari and McLaren extremely close, but they do look a little step ahead of Mercedes, which is the team that he left, obviously. The interest in Formula One, you can sense it's really ramped up as a consequence of Hamilton moving to Ferrari. I mean, let's be honest, this is the most celebrated Formula One driver of his era, the most successful of all time, joining the most iconic, the most historic and the most successful team in the sport's history. No wonder it's had such an impact. He's still very much in the sort of early days of romance. It's all wine and roses between Hamilton and Ferrari at the moment. But certainly one thing that a lot of people suspected might happen is happening this weekend. Leclerc is definitely quicker over one lap. And I wouldn't be surprised if that continues to be the case for certainly a large part of the first part of the season. And if that is the case, Hamilton's going to have to find a way to deal with that, because in terms of pride, he will not enjoy that happening if it does.
I agree. I think it is the right time for Hamilton to be joining Ferrari for a multitude of reasons. I think that it was almost a long, drawn-out divorce, really, with Mercedes. They never really got over what happened in Abu Dhabi in 2021. I think for both of them, they needed a fresh start. But equally, I think it's the people at Ferrari as well. Not only is Charles Leclerc, he seems like quite a nice teammate to have alongside, fast, he'll be pushing Hamilton all the way. But equally, team principal Fred Vasseur and the environment that he seems to have managed to create over the last couple of years since being installed in that role at Ferrari, who have been quite known for their reputation as being difficult to embed yourself in that culture if you're not Italian, if you aren't fluent in the language. And I think he's done a fantastic job. You also got people who have come over from Mercedes who Hamilton knows already, like people like Jerome D'Ambrosio, who's now set up as a deputy team principal, Loic Serra as well, who's now come over to head up the chassis side of things at Ferrari. So I think that makes him feel more comfortable, and also he knows that there are good people around him. He's worked with Fred Vasseur all throughout his junior career too. So I think that's one of the other factors why it's probably quite a good time that Hamilton's joined Ferrari.
So if he's setting a target for his time at Ferrari, I mean, I don't know if you buy into the imagery and the message in that amazing photo we saw of Lewis Hamilton in Maranello, the 7 windows and the door maybe symbolising the 8th world title that he's going for. Andrew's rolling his eyes and chuckling. Everyone says he wants to go for that 8th world title, but he also talks about having fun and enjoying himself. But what's the mission?
Well, on the picture, I've spoken to Hamilton's people. They say it was definitely not set up as 7 windows for 7 titles, they say. But they're not that smart, they said to me. Anyway, but there's no question he's there to win the championship. I mean, the 8th title that he feels he should already have as a consequence of the controversy at Abu Dhabi in 2021 when the race director messed up the rules, basically, and that ended up with Verstappen overtaking him and taking the championship. That's hurt him really deeply, and he's wanted to, what he sees as avenge that injustice, as he sees it, and that's what he wants. And let's be honest, if you're a 7-time world champion and you're joining Ferrari, there's only one goal. That's to win the championship. Anything else won't be success, or won't be absolute success. So yes, he's there to enjoy it, but he's there to win an 8th world championship.
I mean, can you imagine if he does it? Right, this is Ferrari, who, if
think of the montage.
Well, yeah, you go back over the last 15, 20 years. Ferrari, even before the budget cap, they had the biggest budget than most teams. They had more resource, amazing facilities, so much history and legacy. Great drivers, great cars even on occasion, and still were never able to sort of clinch that world title. It's been a very long time for them. Imagine if they do that now. I'm not suggesting this would all be because of Lewis Hamilton. It's not. It's because they've been building, like you said, Harry. Fred Vasseur made some amazing positive changes. But if Lewis was the one that was able to bring that back, I mean, he'd get the keys to Italy, wouldn't he? He would literally be...
He's going to be Brazilian, Italian, British.
He'd be a legend forever.
It would be one of the most storied feats of all time in Formula One history. The film is already probably being written about it as we speak. But there is the other side of the coin here of it doesn't happen and it doesn't work out.
And it's a Sebastian Vettel story.
And that's something and that's where the pressure comes from.
Well, we talked about teammate fights at McLaren. Look at the teammate fight at Ferrari. That's almost tastier than the Norris-Piastri one. Leclerc was saying on Thursday that winning the World Championship with Ferrari is his one remaining ambition and his obsession. He's been brought up by that team since he was a boy. He was going to lose his career age 11 or 12 unless he was picked up by someone. His manager, Nicholas Todd, started to invest in his career. He got into the Ferrari Driver Academy because he's so talented. They've brought him through ever since. He's like Mr. Ferrari, as Hamilton called him. So I think one of the most compelling narratives of the season to come is Hamilton against Leclerc.
Goodness me. As I said at the beginning of our show, so many storylines. We've spoken about McLaren, we've spoken about Ferrari. We've mentioned that Max Verstappen isn't happy and that perhaps Red Bull, after the 3 days of testing, aren't satisfied with the work they've done over the winter break. But can you rule Max Verstappen out, ever?
Absolutely not, no. He definitely wasn't happy with the car yesterday, and they do look a little bit off. A couple of tenths it looked like yesterday. But of course, everybody says this is Max. You can't rule him out. I witnessed a little interesting vignette yesterday which betrayed the continuing lack of harmony at Red Bull. People remember a year ago Christian Horner was embroiled in the controversy about sexual harassment of a female employee, which is always denied and which the team have cleared him of. I was walking out of the paddock behind Max yesterday, and Horner and his dad, Jos Verstappen, fell out big time last year. And he stopped Max at Williams to see someone he knew. The guy said to him, "Is your dad here?" And Max said, "Not allowed."
Interesting. So perhaps that's how they need to start the season at the moment. Do you feel that's come from Max? Do you feel that's come from the team?
No, I interpreted it as the team. Horner particularly has said Jos can't come, basically.
Because that was a distraction last year, let's make no bones about it. We saw Max Verstappen almost entering into a mediator role, a sort of almost a father figure, trying to deal with Christian Horner and his father, Jos Verstappen. It feels like perhaps that could be more in the background this year, but if the car is still not good, then they've got other issues to deal with.
Well, I think if the car's not good, all bets are off. You know, the vultures will be circling. Other teams want Max Verstappen. He's attractive to everybody. Mercedes would have him if they could. You know, there's Aston Martin with turning into the Honda Works team next year. Will he stay, even though he's got a contract?
Well, the other side of Max Verstappen is, of course, that in recent history, when he's been dominant and he's won championships, he has literally been dominant. He has a great car out the box. That's always been one of their strengths. Starting the season really strong. They even did that last year. If he is in a situation where he's not happy, and that's certainly what we seem to see yesterday, but if that continues, is frustration going to start kicking in? And do we see a different side of Max? Do we have to see a different side of Max if he's going to turn this season into something positive? Does he have to find a new element of his own abilities where he doesn't have everything his own way?
I think he'll relish the fight, though, regardless. I was so impressed with Max last year with the way he handled himself with all of that off-track noise anyway, still being able to keep going forward. So he may not have the best car, but he's the man who will extract the absolute maximum out of it.
We'll talk more Formula One very shortly, but it's full-time in the Rugby League. Matt Newsom.
Yes, and Helens have progressed in the Challenge 2 Leeds Rhinos 40.
Matt, thank you very much. Welcome back to Melbourne. We're at the Albert Park circuit for the first round of the 2025 Formula One season, and there are still some question marks as to who is going to appear on top this weekend, and perhaps even the pecking order for the season is still to become clear. I'm joined by our lead commentator, Harry Benjamin, the BBC's F1 correspondent, Andrew Benson, and former mechanic at McLaren, Mark Priestley. We've discussed the highs and lows, perhaps, of each of the teams so far. We've spoken about McLaren, Ferrari, Red Bull, and, of course, Lewis Hamilton departs Mercedes for Ferrari. So what of Mercedes? They have essentially promoted George Russell to fill the gap that Lewis Hamilton leaves, or at least that's how the team is spinning it. And it's Kimi Antonelli taking the second seat, a young driver that Mercedes have had their eye on. We've spoken about Ferrari having their eye on Charles Leclerc for so long, and McLaren, of course, it was Lando Norris. But Kimi is such a protege for Mercedes. Again, another relationship dynamic that you really want to keep an eye on. And yesterday, it wasn't the rookie, Kimi Antonelli, making mistakes. It was George Russell, a more experienced driver.
Right, but he was also faster, interestingly. You would expect. It's Kimi Antonelli's full name, Andrea Kimi Antonelli, by the way. Everyone calls him Kimi, though.
Has he said what he wants to be called?
He doesn't mind. He says Kimi's fine.
Okay.
But I think people in motor racing have ended up calling him Kimi because of Kimi Räikkönen. That's not why he's called Kimi, by the way, he's explained it a couple of times. His family call him Andy, he said.
Just like you, Benny.
Yeah, exactly. He told me when I interviewed him that people call him Andrea, but anyway, whatever. We should really call him Antonelli, I guess, professionally. But look, he's richly talented, only 18, but incredibly mature with it. And you're absolutely right, Rosanna, that is a really interesting dynamic, because Russell's out of contract at the end of the year. But let's not forget, George Russell is the guy who pretty comprehensively beat Lewis Hamilton in his final year at Mercedes last year. They were very evenly matched in their first 2 seasons together. Russell is an exceptional Formula One driver. So, again, but he's under pressure, because Antonelli's the young kid on the block who Toto Wolff, the team principal, has invested a lot of time and money in. Russell has to almost prove himself again, ironically. He says he doesn't have anything to worry about because he believes in himself, but that is definitely in the background.
And so we've spoken about what success looks like for Lewis Hamilton. What does success look like for Mercedes at the moment? They've had such a trough of late over the last few years, unable to get on top of the rules and regulations at the moment. Of course, we've got a huge rule change coming for 2026. Are their eyes already on next year, or are they going to try and sort of get some form of success, whether that's just more race wins than last year, or can they even put themselves in the fight for a championship win in terms of the constructors?
Well, everybody's eyes are on 2026 because it's such a big rule change, but from Mercedes' point of view, they'll want to do well this year as well, not least to prove that they understand finally these regulations, because the next regulations to chassis, although they're changing, there is an element of these current rules in them still.
I think it's going to be an important year for Mercedes. I think they, as Benny says, they need to try and show that they have understood these regulations at some stage. But if they can get consistent podiums and take the odd win this year, I think that will be a successful season for them. I think if they can get Kimi Antonelli up to speed and up there and consistent, that'll be good. I know he wasn't as fast as George yesterday, but it was a smooth, quiet session. When you think how Antonelli kind of burst onto the scene in Monza and immediately put the car in the wall, I'd say that was a nice, steady way to begin the season. You don't want he's got so many rookies on the grid this year. You want to stay, I think almost it's quite nice to sort of fly under the radar a little bit in these early stages and just get your feet under the table.
I think Mercedes have had, if you think about the generation of rules that went before this one, obviously Mercedes were the dominant force. They nailed it, they got everything right, they won everything over many years. In this rule cycle, they've just struggled all the way through pretty much, and so they're behind the curve when it comes to getting on top of it. Whereas we've got one season left, everyone else is beginning to converge, looking for the finer little improvements. Mercedes is still a little bit behind. On the flip side, they are looking at 26. They've got a wonderful team, we know that. They're putting together a really strong driver lineup, because if Kimi Antonelli does deliver what we think he will, well, that's something spectacular to look forward to. So if they can turn 2026 into a really big opportunity and kind of repeat what they did way back in 2014, things will look bright for them and they'll be able to recover.
You mentioned rookies. We've got 6 rookies on the grid. There's been debate about who's a rookie and who's not, because we've actually seen some of the drivers already in Formula One. They've been super subbing in and out, and they've had some success in doing so. But it's actually, I think, since 2010, isn't it, the first time we've had 6 rookies on the grid? And Nico Hülkenberg was one of those, and he's still here, debuting with Sauber this weekend, making the switch from Haas to Sauber. And I suppose I expected maybe even more cars in the wall or in the gravel yesterday. They've added so much gravel to this track, it's almost hard to escape it. But it was Ollie Behrman, the British driver with Haas, who really had a big accident yesterday. He was absolutely fine, but the car was not. So they've changed the engine and the gearbox. Didn't make it out into FP2, but it shows how tricky this track is. And in terms of what we can expect later on, of course, everyone's turning up the wick. Ollie Behrman hasn't had as much practice. What does that mean for himself and the rookies later on today as we try to set the grid for the Grand Prix?
Well, it's not a great start for Behrman. I think that's fair to say. And Haas are looking a little bit ropey as well in general with their pace. Esteban Ocon, his teammate, was 19th yesterday, and Behrman didn't get out, so the 2 Haas cars right at the back. Behrman basically carrying too much speed into that quick left-right-hander of turn 9 and 10, got himself out into the gravel, and then he was just an absolute passenger as he slammed into the wall. And he's held his hands up to that one and said he was just pushing, trying to find a bit too much too soon. So he'll need to get as much track action as he can in FP3 before he gets ready for qualifying. But we have seen Behrman in action already, so we know he's a decent racer. Of course, it was a Saudi Arabia last year where he was catapulted in last minute for Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari and managed to score points. So we know he's an impressive driver. It will just be now a test of his mental agility and how he can bounce back from something like this. But there is a lot of pressure on the rookies. But it's interesting, just on Liam Lawson, who's sort of being put in the next pawn in Red Bull's game alongside Verstappen. Yes, he didn't look like he had a great session yesterday, but even though he's done 11 Grand Prix across the last couple of seasons, he's actually never really raced. He's never raced around this track. So we've got to remember that.
Only
driver. He was in Formula 2. Formula 2 now does come here, but when he was in Formula 2, it didn't. So we've got to remember that, and that you do have to allow a grace period for some of these rookies as well. So I think that's important to remember.
So let's look ahead then. We know we've got qualifying coming later on. Always exciting, with a bit of weather maybe playing its part. Very hot today, and then a cool change coming through tomorrow with rain on the forecast. Last year it was a 1-2 for Ferrari, with Lando Norris completing the podium for McLaren. Do we see that happening again? Of course, there were reliability issues for Max Verstappen and Red Bull last year, so perhaps it was slightly skewed. But who have you got your sights on for the podium, Mark?
I actually think Oscar Piastri, the home hero, Australian racing for McLaren, I think he could deliver something spectacular today. Could take pole.
Harry?
I think for pole position, Charles Leclerc.
Andrew?
I see Leclerc on pole, but it's going to rain tomorrow by the looks of it. There's a very strong forecast of rain, in which case is Verstappen going to win the race? Red Bull's not that quick.
A Brazilian Grand Prix moment yet again.
Exactly.
You really feel that?
If it's wet, I would put my money on Verstappen. Although the others, Hamilton, Norris, Leclerc, they're all good in the wet, and who knows what will happen. But I think if it's raining, Verstappen will be favourite.
I love this. We started the show by saying there were so many storylines. There are so many potential race winners and podium finishers this year, and I think that's why Formula One is it's in such a great place. It's in rude health, isn't it?
Absolutely is. This could be one of the best seasons in Formula One history, and we're on the cusp of seeing some amazing drivers going up against brand new talent. We've got experienced drivers who've switched teams in the middle of the field too. So it's in a really healthy place.
Yeah, and then we rip the rule book up next year and start all over again. Excellent.
Don't talk about that yet.
Well, we've been here in Melbourne a few days. We've had the chance to chat with the drivers, talk to the teams about how they're feeling. You can find out what we're thinking about the 2025 season on the Checkered Flag podcast. You've got your preview to the weekend. And we also did a special podcast focusing on the British drivers in with a shout for the championship. Of course, that's maybe Sir Lewis Hamilton at Ferrari, Lando Norris and George Russell. We didn't focus on Ollie Behrman and Alex Albon because there are nuances to perhaps their chances for the championship. And of course, Alex Albon races under the Thai flag. But do check out the podcast and do join us over the weekend. We'll have live coverage of the Australian Grand Prix, the season opener across the BBC. We're excited for the season. We hope you are too. Next up is Stephen Nolan. But first, let's get the BBC News with Dan Maudsley.
The voice of the